Welcome back to Freedom and Prosperity Radio, the weekly radio news magazine that we put together here at the Virginia Institute for Public Policy, and also make sure that you can download previous episodes. Previously loved episodes is what they call it in the automotive industry. You can find them online at our YouTube channel, youtube.com, and then search Freedom and Prosperity Radio. Our next guest back on the program, president of American Commitment, also with the National Center for Public Policy Research, and their Community Leadership Network, Project 21, Melanie Collette. Melanie, welcome back. How are you doing this weekend?
I am well. Thank you for having me.
Now, you just wrote a piece on the debt and why, the debt is hurting our communities, and, why, the standing firm against the debt ceiling increase is the right thing, especially for the working class Americans that are struggling to make ends meet. Talk about that, because I feel like that's a story that should be getting more play in and amongst Washington, D.C., but the media doesn't seem interested in it.
They don't seem to be interested in it, because the fact of the matter is that people who are of the wealthier class will always find ways to avoid taxes and spending and the implications of all of the spending that the government is doing. But the people who are going to be affected the most by these policies are your middle class people who maybe can't afford to have, a top tier expert tax evading financial advisor or tax preparer that is going to help them avoid all of these horrible policies. And so they're going to be affected the most. And not only that, but again, when it comes to things like inflation, all of these policies are highly inflationary, and the people who get affected the most, again, are the lower and middle class. And what really is bothersome about these things is the simple fact that they often, when they're doing their big virtue signaling, as the leftists want to do, are often saying that they're doing these things for the benefit of black and brown communities, and they do anything but. These policies do anything but.
Well, and when you talk about what is happening, and they'll pander, they'll say that they're not going to prosecute crimes under a certain level and things like that, and I've made this case for years. I have never had a lot of money, and if somebody stole my car, it might not be a brand new car. It certainly doesn't have anti-theft insurance on it, and now I've got to walk miles and miles and miles to work because I don't live in an area with heavy bus service. So that kind of idea of not punishing thefts and things like that also is horribly damaging to the people who can ill afford it the most.
Not only in earnest, as you mentioned, does it hurt the people, does it hurt those people the most, but also, in my mind, it's very racist. It just seems like anytime that the left installs a new policy that they say helps black and brown people, it always has to do with something negative, like bail reform, because most black people are getting locked up, like legalization of marijuana, that's an equity agenda because most black people smoke weed. Like anytime they say it, they're always like, we're helping the black and brown people, and this is how. But again, it usually has something to do with something negative. It's ridiculous. And, Project 21, and when it comes to taxing and spending, our blueprint for America, one of the things that we want to go back to promoting is the nuclear family, for example, and getting rid of the penalties for marriage and having two incomes.
Right.
Just for example, raising asset limits for social programs, repealing these sin taxes that predominantly affect the middle and lower class. All of these things are not helpful to our communities and tend to cost more money.
Melanie, here in the Commonwealth of Virginia, we just stood up against a hemp sales law. But one of the things that the General Assembly was trying to put in there was that the first in line for all of these marijuana dispensary licenses would be the underserved community. And I think that speaks to what you were just talking about there, which is, hey, we've got new business for you. You can sell drugs to one another legally now as long as you send the tax to us. That and casino gaming, it just seems like they're doing everything they can to separate us from the money that we haven't sent them in taxes already.
For a certainty. And then, as you said, let's not encourage black and brown people to be financial advisors. Let's encourage them to sell cannabis.
Right.
Like, you know what I mean? Not against anybody who uses that substance, but there are just so many areas of the economy where black and brown people, and frankly anyone, could work. Meanwhile, they're killing, coal jobs and anything related to nuclear energy, areas where the lower and middle class could possibly be getting jobs without having to have a college degree. And again, they say we're doing this because this is what the black and brown people need and want. And I'm like, who are they talking to? No one called me about this.
Melanie Collette is on with us, president of American Commitment with the National Center for Public Policy and Project 21 on this week's Freedom and Prosperity Radio. Melanie, when the Congress is standing up against the idea of the debt limit increase, the press is going to immediately come, I guess it's June sometime, when we finally reach it, talk about the devastation, and they, of course, they all come after Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security and say these out-of-control conservatives are going to put these entitlement programs at risk, when really what's happening is the risk is their games with Social Security and the Medicare trust funds and giving them to people who have never vetted into them at all and creating a scenario where we have 2 workers for every beneficiary now, where it used to be in the dozens.
Exactly. I mean, we need to tighten these programs up. Nobody's talking about cutting these social programs for people who actually need them. But when we are stretching and expanding the number of people who qualify for these programs, really just in an effort to control them, in my opinion, we are doing them a disservice, not to mention expanding those programs to people who are not here legally because they have kids here who are American citizens, and all these, incentives that they give for people who do not belong in this country to take advantage of the benefits of being here.
And that, in and of itself, even when they talk about amnesty, I just watch the support they have in the black community decrease more and more, already struggling. Is that open border issue still resonating in the impoverished communities that are just finding themselves, in some cases, getting overrun with people who weren't even from this country?
I think that it really is. And, the black community at large better wake up and understand whose jobs they are going to affect the most. It's going to be our community. Those are the jobs that they're coming for. Let's just be honest about it. So, you really have to be careful and pay attention. And I would encourage more people to pay to that immigration status, because that is really where, in my opinion, black communities are going to be negatively affected in their own, economy.
So what words of encouragement to the members of the House that are standing up against this debt ceiling increase, and Kevin McCarthy and Congressman Good and folks like that who have created this coalition? What is their message of what they're trying to do, making it into the poor communities, or are shows like this, not being heard? We're proverbially the tree falling in the woods with no one there to hear it. I
think we are definitely making inroads, especially as members of Project 21 get to testify in front of Congress as to how their policies are affecting Black and brown communities. I think more of us are in the media and constantly talking about these things and promoting these things on social media. I think that the word is getting out, but certainly there is much more to do.
So where do we begin, Melanie? We were talking about the economic impact of all of the out-of-control inflation and the skyrocketing grocery store prices, and then the leftists will come in and they invent words. First, it was food desert, which basically meant we drove all the grocery stores and their razor-thin margins out of a neighborhood. But it begins with them driving the jobs out of those neighborhoods. If somebody in our flagship city, Charlottesville, subsistence living is $35,000 a year. You need to make at least that to afford the basic necessities. Well, that means an employer, by compliance codes, has to have $70,000 attached to that employee. We need to reform our labor laws. We need to reform our taxation policies so that these jobs can be created, don't we?
We certainly do. And I mean, the taxation in and of itself is just the biggest scam. I know it's a cliche to say taxation is theft, but it just so is. And particularly for people who cannot afford it. We need to be more creative when it comes to our tax policies so that people who are mostly affected by these things, we're taxed on our income. We're taxed on the things that we buy. We're taxed on things that we currently own, like our property that we've already bought, if we're fortunate enough to be able to do that. It is ridiculous how much the citizenry in general is taxed. And that is where we really need to start. Again, the wealthy, not so much affected by these things as the middle and lower class are directly affected.
What about education? Part of the Virginia Institute for Public Policy, we're members of the Virginia Education Opportunity Alliance, and there were a few years ago where the Black community, especially, and the Latino community were just all agog about the idea of school choice, whether it be a parochial school or not. Is that enthusiasm still there for reforming the education system to give parents more choice, Melanie?
I think the enthusiasm is definitely there among our citizens, especially since post-COVID. It really got people's attention, what was going on in the classroom. I'm a former educator, and one of the reasons why I am a former educator is for that very reason, because of the indoctrination that goes on not only among the students, but among the teachers. The teachers are who they indoctrinate first. Mm-hmm. And then they use those teachers to indoctrinate the students. So I think that, I don't think that the cry was as loud when people were talking about the situations in socioeconomically depressed communities where the schools were not doing as well. But now that the public schools indoctrination programs have been highlighted, I think the school choice is much more of a hot button issue.
And I think that goes back to, keeping a generation undereducated, creates that need for the nanny state. And again, I've used this phrase before, Munchausen's by government syndrome. They make us sick as a society and then insist they're the only ones who can fix it. I see young people turning, Melanie, give us a message that says they're getting it. And can we pull out of this in time? It was $6 trillion more in debt. How much more can we take on this?
We really can't. I think that there's this overarching attitude among the uninformed that the taxpayers, or that the government, this entity called the government, that people don't realize are actually taxpayers, and that there's actually people and paychecks and money attached to those dollars that are being spent. I think that people are kind of starting to get that and become aware of that. But there is no mystery government that just has this bowl of money that you can keep coming to. And I regularly say and like to remind people that it's very bad how much we owe, but what's worse than that is who we owe. Mm-hmm. It's an economic war. When we owe bad actors like the government in communist China, who do not mean us well, who do not wish us prosperity as a country. Mm-hmm. That is very problematic. So, we need to really pay attention to not only, what we owe or who we owe.
It's interesting. Some of our Virginia senators, because they have membership in the Democratic Party, had to go out and demagogue the debt limit, saying we're putting Social Security in danger, yet they've been the ones who for decades have been borrowing against the Social Security. So either it's China and their ownership of our debt, and then we've got a bunch of IOUs where Social Security was, and yet conservatives like you and me, Melanie, we're the ones putting Social Security in jeopardy.
That's exactly right. When really they shouldn't have been touching that money in the first place. Anybody who conducts their finances in such a way that they're robbing Peter to pay Paul is eventually going to have a problem.
Yeah, I think there's a word for it. It's called a Ponzi scheme, isn't it?
Yes. If it wasn't the government, if it was some private entity doing the same thing as the government does, they would be arrested.
Last one for you, Melanie Collette from Project 21, American Commitment, president of. We saw the midterms where a lot of the Democrats held onto their seats because poverty is a winning issue for them. They just say, hey, I'm going to send more money. Is there a narrative that we can use that will blunt that? Because it didn't seem to work in the midterms.
It didn't, and I think the only way to blunt that is through information and helping people to understand that they would be much better off learning to fish rather than being given fish. And that's through having an entrepreneurial, capitalistic spirit rather than a government handout spirit. And we just have to continue to promote that. Organizations like Project 21 continue to spread the word, and we continue to expand as an organization, which is all across the country, which is a very good thing. And speaking to not only national media outlets, but regional outlets like yourself is the way we're going to get it done.
Melanie, thank you so much. And again, keep up the great work, nationalcenter.org and Project 21. You have a wonderful weekend, and thanks for joining us from American Commitment.
Thank you. Thanks again for having me.
And thank you on behalf of all of us here at the Virginia Institute for Public Policy. My name is Joe Thomas. Until next weekend, so long, and thanks for all the fish.